Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Do we have a Hartford Public Schools virtual background?
Well, I could get the logo to you, yeah. And then you just save it and use it as your background.
Yeah. I think I've seen the superintendent sometimes have a theme background. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Did uh did folks reply or accept this meeting?
I know Kim said she wasn't able to. There were a few tentatives and a few accepts. Let me check. Oh, there's Jahayu. Miss Escobar.
Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Hi, Christina.
Morning, good.
Doing well.
Cherry Dia.
Good morning, AJ.
Good morning. How are you all?
Doing well.
Good. So is this a committee at a whole meeting?
It is.
All right, I see a committee at a half right now.
Yeah, we got a couple more minutes.
Oh, all right. Christina, your hair is saying something today. It's saying something. I don't know what it's saying, but it's saying something.
My coworker was like, "Oh, good hair day." I was like, "Thanks."
Yeah, it's
Nothing,
saying
but
something. It's speaking. It's giving life.
when it does, I'll take it. Thank you. I'm just checking with a few board members if they are able to. I know Miss Oliver said she was traveling, so she would not be able to make it, but the
Okay.
rest.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Christina, I
Morning.
see that someone started a meeting in Teams.
Oh, is that erg?
Yeah, in the
I can
meeting,
message that Teams meeting and say to join here.
Yes.
Yeah.
It automatically does that, and I disabled it finally, but it must have been after I sent this one out. So
I just sent a message.
thank you. Don't know why it does that.
Good morning.
good morning. Christina, you may know the answer to this question. For the committee of the whole, is there a particular number of board members we need?
No, there's no action being taken. So it's just a learning.
Yep. Let's give it another couple of minutes here.
Team, I'm at the Success Center at Hartford High, so there might be, there's, just students coming in and out. So if there's noise in the background, I'll try to minimize.
Oh. Tyrone said he's waiting. There's no waiting room. So I just told him, don't click on Teams. So he will be joining shortly. And then I know Dr. Schmerling did accept, so we'll see if he can.
Okay, looks like we have Tyrone joining. I know Yvette probably has a conflict. What about Shantae?
I sent her a message, no reply yet.
Okay. One, two, three, four. Let's give it another, let's give it another minute and then we can get started. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. All right, let's get started. I guess before we officially start, just want to express all my gratitude for the great work that our teachers and superintendent, you and your staff does, just given the recent incidents clearly in Texas. As everyone knows, I'm very much a believer in right, high conflict, high respect conversations. And I think at the end of the day, the work that we do is for the students, right? And just hearing that news yesterday was heartbreaking. I know that's it's a little damper to start this meeting, but I did want to acknowledge that I think all the work that we do as a governing body, you and your leadership team and all our various stakeholders very much have the students at the center of everything. So again, I appreciate that. With that being said, let me kind of lay some background information for my colleagues in terms of this particular meeting. As you know, and Chief Penn, please keep me honest. As you're well aware, right, the district, and I would say throughout the country, there's been some staffing issues. And from that, as it relates particularly for our budget, there was a fair amount of funds left over, what I would call surplus. I think we had some discussions in the past about that surplus. The purpose of this particular meeting is there is a surplus amount that is, I don't want to say outstanding, but that will be realized, right, as in the coming weeks. And had conversation with the superintendent on how to best utilize those dollars. And where we gravitated towards was, again, right, focusing on the students. I think oftentimes we've heard about the retention bonuses or incentives for our staff and so forth. I think the superintendent with her leadership team really took a close look at how can we really impact our students that hit some of the key metrics that we judge, right? Clearly one of them being attendance, graduation rate and so forth. So the purpose of this meeting is I would say twofold. One, for the superintendent and her team to articulate kind of what their thinking is around the surplus that we have as it relates to our students. And then two, making sure we get everyone's input as it relates to the logistics of these funds. I think this is very unique in the sense that we have to transfer the funds to, I believe, Hartford Promise. I won't go into details of how that mechanic works, but I'll pass it over to the superintendent, Chief Penn, to provide that update and kind of walk us through your thinking and rationale and potential next steps. Oh, sorry. And sorry to cut you off. And the purpose of this call was to make sure that we socialize this concept early now before we get to the board meeting, so there's no surprises. So feel free to pose any questions or comments to the team. Superintendent.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And Chief Penn, I'm tagging you in as well because I do appreciate the background setting with regard to the surplus. So I actually would like to start there, Chairman Rieger, with an overview of where we are thus far with the surplus, because what I ultimately want to shift the conversation to is an investment that we are looking to make for students specifically. When we look at the surplus and what we have done thus far with the surplus, the one student group, if you will, that we the one group that has not been specifically targeted, if you will, is our students. And so I want to be intentional with this opportunity. And so I'll share my screen, and then Chief Penn, you and I can kind of speak to how things have evolved with the surplus. I know that, we're 16.9 is the number. And we did want to make sure that, we maintain the commitment to the principle of the rule of targeting this one-time spending that we have, right? The surplus in a way that is not incurring ongoing costs. So Chief Penn, if you can kind of walk us through and specifically as it relates to the staff retention, honing in on the retro pay, right, for all of the specific bargaining units. Thank you.
Sure. So as is noted here on the sheet, our staff retention is approximately 5.3 million. 3 million of it's going to get paid out on Friday in terms of those year-end bonuses that we've been discussing. Excuse me. But the other piece of it is, and you've seen all these contracts come before you now, there are retros back to 7/1/21 for 4 of the bargaining units. School security, our paraeducators, our maintenance and food service workers, and our health professionals. So we were very intentional around the way that we were negotiating those contracts, knowing that the retros were going to be in excess of $2 million for those 4, and making sure that we could get it paid within this year. So that's a good use of that surplus. And, you know, I should point out at the very top, you know, as a rule, we're trying to target spending to things that are one-time in nature. We don't want to spend money that creates ongoing costs going forward as a result of this surplus. There's been a lot done around school safety, security, facility repairs, 3.9 million. Pretty much every school got impacted in some way from that. We were intentional about that to make sure that as a result of the building walkthroughs that were being done, as stuff was noticed, it was taken care of. So we teed up a lot of work around that. You know, the board 2 years ago started putting away money into a fiscal sustainability / non-lapsing account. We can have 2% of our operating budget in there, which is 5.6 million. So that should say it's protected to 22-23. So we didn't need it in this year. It now rolls over into next year, and we hope to continue to roll that forward as needed. A couple of one-off things that we did purchases on. You know, we were renting chairs for graduation ceremonies that wound up being costly. So we found out that we can actually buy the chairs and store them, and it became much more cost-effective to do it that way. You just approved the paper cut contract, I believe, at the last meeting. This is the one where we're deploying the print management software and readers to all the remaining printers within the district. We replaced the delivery van for the print shop. The print shop actually does a fair amount of delivery work around the district, running things back and forth. And then it's this last piece that I think is the bulk of the conversation today, in terms of this remaining $2 million in talking through Hartford Promise and what I've come to refer to as Early Promise, just so I can keep the two distinguished. And with that, let me kind of turn it back to the superintendent to start framing, you know, how we're thinking about this 2 million.
Thank you. Chairman, before I move on, is there a pause here before I go into the post-secondary investment?
No, I think as you talk about Early Promise, I think it'll be clear of why we're soliciting the board for their feedback.
Great.
And again, the mechanism, right, that we need to actually make this, bring this to realization.
Great, thank you. So let me frame the vision for the $2 million. And it is the proposed investment is for the post-secondary investment pathways, which right, is a strategic investment of the general surplus to promote positive attendance habits and increase post-secondary success outcomes. And it includes a pathway. If you might recall, when we first embarked on the DME, the District Model of Excellence, it was specifically to create the pathways, right? The sequencing from our K-5 to middle school to high school. And so this would be an investment that also has a similar pathway. And so you see here, K through fifth, we're calling it the launching pad, which is to promote positive early attendance habits and provide tangible rewards for our Hartford students, resident students that ultimately graduate from high school. The 6th through 8th, the Early Promise, which is in some ways similar to the current Hartford Promise, but it starts earlier. And then the Hartford Promise, which is already there. And then Jesse, I'm gonna, also tag you in whenever, as we go through this overview here. So the K-5, this is like the base, right? The launching pad. The idea is that students will receive $100 per year towards an investment fund that will be distributed when they graduate high school to be used for post-secondary programming. And that could be, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, or any credentialing program, knowing that we have some students that might not want to enroll in 2 or 4-year college programming. Students will only be eligible for the yearly contribution, right? If they are our residents in the city and they are in our schools, and they must receive the 90% attendance to receive that annual investment. If you walk over to the investment column, it would be a 1.7. Is that what we're looking at, Jesse? Potentially?
The 1.7 also, just to note, is cumulative. So that includes a kindergartner now staying with us through all 5 years and then graduating high school. So that's not an initial investment, but that would be what the long-term investment may be.
And then the initial investment, knowing that there's this 2 million, right, would be what initially, if you could just clarify that? Or it would be the other million, right? Because when we look at the early promise below, we're looking at almost $1 million.
Yeah, I can explain a little bit about that 1.7. So the 1.7 with the launching pad. So that number accounts for approximately 1,190 students in each of our K through 5 grades. So if we were to start this now, the 5th graders would be eligible for 1 year of that. The kindergartners would be eligible for 6 years. So for our current 5th grade class, they are counted once, the 4th grade class twice, and so on back to kindergarten. It also accounts for 70% of those students achieving 90% plus attendance. And these numbers are really for planning purposes. Of course, we want to, that is not our ultimate attendance goal. So we'd want that to be higher. And we would also need to determine at what grade our students are entering the school. Not everyone enters as a kindergartner. And so there is some more like in-depth analysis that will need to happen to come up with a more exact estimate. But that is for planning purposes only, accounting for kindergartners getting 6 years of the contribution and 5th graders getting 1.
Thank
Correct.
you. So moving to the second, part of the pathway, right, or 6th through 8th, that would be the early promise, and it would be $500 per year as an investment. This is the funds would be held at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. I'll speak to the conversations that I've had with the foundation and distribute it when they graduate high school, and also qualify for the Hartford, to be a Hartford Promise Scholar. Right, they have to meet the 90% attendance while in middle school. And again, the funds would be used in this situation for the Hartford Promise, in addition to the Hartford Promise scholarship. Hartford Promise would, help monitor the students. Right now, we do have an agreement with Hartford Promise in which we have data sharing, regular data sharing. So the investment here would be, the 955, almost $1 million. And Jesse, if you can explain the 147 as the current base, the average, if you will, of current students that would be eligible.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I can also explain a little bit more about how we get to that approximate $1 million. So 147 accounts for a high estimate of students qualifying for Hartford Promise. And so the number of students that qualifies ranges from approximately 120 to 145. And that depends on the size of the class. The percentage of students qualifying has increased over the years, but class sizes will vary. So I'm using a higher end estimate here because the students are only eligible for those investments after they've qualified for Hartford Promise. What's showing here is an investment in our rising 9th graders. So they would be eligible for this just in terms of our equity piece. If they are attending Summer Bridge, that would go into an account for them, and they would be eligible for it if they achieve the Hartford Promise Scholarship. And then it accounts for, again, 1 year of what would be our rising 8th graders, 2 years of our rising seventh graders and potentially 3 years of our rising sixth graders. That also goes back to fifth and fourth grade. So I did a cost estimate that goes all the way back to fourth grade there. As we determine like utilizing the $2 million surplus, we can start to do an analysis of how many of those students join us in fourth grade and fifth grade, to back into the available funds. And again, this would not be the contribution that would be needed immediately. This is the long-term cumulative. And so I would assume that this will end up being a smaller number.
Superintendent, quick question. Actually, I do want to take a pause. I know Board Member Brody and Board Member Dr. Schmerling joined us. I'm not sure exactly when they joined, but just for context, the conversation here is to really take a look at there's additional, let's call it $2 million in surplus that's a byproduct of staffing shortages. As you're well aware, the district has invested funds into buildings and staffing retention and so forth. So this conversation is to really take a look at the $2 million that we have and how do we invest it in our kids. And what the superintendent's proposing is what I would call early promise and launch pad, which would be a continuum of Hartford Promise that goes down grades. So I just want to make sure that you have that context as we're having this conversation. But I do have a question, and maybe you'll get to this towards the end. Do you have an estimate of what a student can earn, assuming that this all gets approved, if they were to start next year as a 8th grader and then project that out to the time that they graduate within Hartford Public Schools? Like, what if they were in this program and they met all the requirements, what would they earn from what we're doing in addition to what Hartford Promise is doing?
It's starting in middle school? Or
No.
if we start back in kinder, the whole
No,
continuum?
the whole, I want the entire picture. Like, what would a kid or student or family potentially earn if all these levers were in place and they met the qualifications? What can they expect to walk out with as they potentially look at colleges and universities?
So Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, the least they could, if they met the criteria all throughout, are we looking at 22,000, Jesse, base?
Correct. Yeah, 600 for the elementary school piece, 1,500 for the middle school piece, and then Hartford Promise provides up to $20,000. So,
and this is without any additional like fundraising, right? So this is because the opportunity here is, potentially in partnership with the foundation. These are the early conversations that we're having, right? What could this allow for us in the future in terms of fundraising for additional funding, so that instead of 100, it becomes 200, or instead of the 500 in the middle school, it becomes 1,000.
Yep. Board Member Escribano.
Thank you, Phil. 2 questions, and one of them is a comment. I have to head out a little bit early. I'm going to have you guys in the background, but I think this is a phenomenal idea. Obviously, I'm biased because I worked for Hartford Promise and I love Richard and the team, but my first comment is I always think about the sustainability piece, particularly around funding, right? How can we continue this? And I'm sure you guys, Richard and Hartford Foundation, have been thinking about this, and I'm just talking out loud right now. Is there any way looking forward as we implement this that we can work with some of the funders like Travelers, the Hartford, to match some of these funds for our students, or they can sponsor certain levels, right? The Hartford can sponsor elementary schools, Travelers can sponsor the high school level. I'm just thinking out loud, like, how can we make this sustainable in terms of matching these funds? In addition to that, I know some of the high schools have like alumni awards by the time they graduate. So how does that piece come into play, the alumni awards? I don't know if all the schools have it or if it's just Hartford High, but I would love to know more information about all the alumni awards that our schools have and how that comes into play with this fund. And if there's a way, again, we can work more collaboratively with the alumni staff who sets that up to see if there's a way we can match or figure out. So I would love more information about that piece as well. And then my last question slash comment, part of Hartford Promise is, their efforts. It's not just about funding, it's about providing the support and the resources in these conversations. So I know Hartford Promise will be expanding with staff. So I guess my question is, will they be allowed to go in, right, to elementary school, to all of these, and start having these conversations on a frequent basis so we catch our kids early, like 4th grade, elementary school, hey, bringing them, whether it's on college trips or just having these conversations early on. I'm sure you guys will speak about that, but I think that's another important aspect besides the funds, right? Obviously that's important, but those types of support that our kids are going to get so we can get them early with this idea. Thank you. I know that was a lot.
No, I've captured, right? So I heard programmatic structures and supports, and I heard sustainability. And definitely the programmatic piece is key for us. So I think now we can say in Hartford Public Schools that we have a strong base for a continuum of post-secondary supports, right? When we started this work to have these pathways, it was mostly about school reconfigurations, right? To align with the K-5, middle school, and high school. Now we have the programming, and we do start in 5th grade, starting those conversations around college and career. That gets even more specific, more intensified in the middle school where our students are having that exposure. And then obviously in the high schools, we also, right, we have all of the college planning, career planning, and our actual pathways in some of our high schools. So absolutely. The other piece to this is that, there's going to be a family component to this because we really want to change. We want to cultivate those habits very early on. We already have the data point that has told us for a few years now that in kindergarten, right? We know our pain points, kinder and 9th grade in terms of chronic absenteeism, right? And attendance. Those are the highest chronic absenteeism grades. So we want to start earlier on having those conversations, those habits, not just as a school system, but like as a community. One thing that the foundation, in speaking with Jay Williams, the president and CEO yesterday, and even all the times that we've talked about this, because this vision, is not recent, it's something that I've thought about for quite some time. It's just, right, we haven't had the resources to make an initial investment. And the conversation we were having with the team at the foundation is that there is a need for like an ecosystem of post-secondary supports, right? We currently do have Hartford Public Schools where we have our continuum. There are others in the community that are supporting. Workforce connects to this somehow. And so to your point, Ms. Escorbano, about, what are all the other investments that are currently around and the new possible investments. So to that point, one requirement would be for, in order to do this, at least, to pass the funds to the foundation, right, as the holder, there would need to be what I believe is called a high-level fund agreement, right, with the foundation. And that is to articulate what the parameters are, and ultimately acknowledging that, as the holder of the funds, right, they also need some direction, right, for the funds.
Can I interject? So I think this is great conversation. I just want to be, again, mindful of time. What I would say, I think what we're talking about is programming and so forth, which I think can be discussed at the various committees. I do think that this does require, right, for it to be socialized, I think probably school and community engagement, and then potentially finance as there is a budget implication here. But I just want to make sure we don't get into programming on this call. The purpose of this call is to really provide the overview of here's a surplus that we have, here's how we're thinking about it, and there's going to be more work needed to really kind of carve out how it works and some of the guardrails that we have to put in place to make sure that Hartford Promise is able to deliver and Ms. Escobar, to your point, that it is sustainable. So I think those conversations are probably more appropriate for committee. But with that being said, Superintendent, I'll turn over you to finish.
Yes, so that is, well, I think we're done in terms of the pathway, because the third piece of the pathway is that, right, it connects, it feeds to the Hartford Promise, which is currently established.
Okay, so just so I want to make sure I heard correctly. So we're saying that a student, if all this was in place right now, that a student that starts in kindergarten will earn $20,000 towards
22,
22, and that includes Hartford Promise?
yes, with Hartford Promise, right? Because, you know, when you think about the 5,000 every year in high school. And so that's the least. And I say that's the least because, right, if a student decides to go to UConn, right, Jesse, there's a match to that. And so that 22,000 or that initial 20,000 now becomes 40,000. If, right, UConn matches 5,000 a year.
So, okay, so when you say UConn, that's for another time. Okay. So what's
But
the most?
base, the most.
No, let me ask
Oh.
it different. What's the most? Like, don't give me the least. Like, what's the most?
Then just, do you have an example, Jesse, of what the most has been? You know,
Yeah.
when you think about UConn and Trinity and those that match.
Yeah, absolutely. I could, so Hartford Promise has partner universities that will either match the scholarship dollar for dollar, or they will provide housing. Now, the most would be when it's matched dollar for dollar. So a student might be eligible for the entire $5,000 per year from Hartford Promise. They would get 20,000 matched by UConn, 40,000, and then our incremental $2,100 would be added to that. And again, that $2,100 for us is the investment that we make, not necessarily what they may have access to at the end of their 12 years at Hartford Public Schools, depending on performance. And so just to note, the calculations that I included is for that longer term investment. That is not necessarily what would be required initially. That includes a 5-year-old that will be graduating in 12 years.
I mean,
Okay.
ideally, right, if we had a larger surplus.
Yes.
Then we'd want to make sure that, right, the entire, right, K to 12 continuum was covered. And then, Chairman, if you, right, so if your question were, think about a family that has 2 or 3 kids, right, and potentially maximizing that 40,000 now becomes, 120,000.
Okay. Thank you for that. So let's turn it over to questions. I know, Ms. Escobar, I see your hand. I want to see if other members of the team have questions that they want to pose to the superintendent. Ms. Brody, I see you made a comment in the chat. Do you have a question? Okay, Ms. Escobar.
Just a recommendation, when we bring this to committees, it would be helpful, Jesse, just for other board members who may not know, to have a list of those university partnerships that Hartford Promise have, USJ, U Chicago, UConn, and just a breakdown of that. I think that would be helpful for board members to have a list of those university partnerships.
Absolutely.
That was it. Thank you.
Board Member Bello?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question about the vehicle at the foundation. Is that a fund that will be endowed? Will it grow? Just a little bit about sort of if we can anticipate this being available in perpetuity.
Those are still, Ms. Bayo, the conversations that we're having with the foundation. That on June 6th is the next time that that I should receive from the foundation the draft fund agreement so that we can react to it. So those are 2 key questions that I'll know.
And if there's any way we can have a match, that would be great too.
I think that is something that, right, this lends significant opportunity too, not only with the foundation, right, but with others as well.
Great. Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about that piece. Thank you.
Chairman, Phil, I have a question.
Board Member Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Superintendent, and everyone who put some thought behind this. My question is, again, with the surplus, and if this is the potential route that we will go through, and obviously we'll be discussing a lot of this in committee. I think this is great. I want to know, how can this tie in with the Adams Knight grant in term, not the grant, the marketing push that we're doing with Represent, and how can we get the word out about this in a very clear way that folks know that potentially this is something that can really benefit students, and it just kind of takes the lead, because like sometimes we do great stuff but no one knows about it, or people might play ignorant to it, but this is undeniably something that can literally change the track and direction of a young person's life, getting these opportunities to attend college. So how can we potentially tie this in and create some connectivity to what we're already doing in the areas of that contract? And if it's not possible, how can we create a route to where this is publicly known in a way that is undeniable? You send your students here, here's the opportunity that you have. This is not, you might not be getting this offer in Glastonbury or Simsbury, but this is something that you're definitely getting here, and it sets us apart in the educational race.
I appreciate that, and I agree that I think there's always room for improvement in terms of our marketing and sharing the good opportunities that exist here for our students. As to the current contract, right? The current contract is very specific to that scope, but we can always, try to make those connections. And right, when we have a partner like the foundation and like Hartford Promise, right? They also, would play a role here, and that could be something. Could we add this to some of the agreements as well, right, to leverage their marketing and communications?
If I could just add a piece to that, there's also marketing and awareness campaigns we have around our magnet schools and offerings, and so this would certainly be a part of that. Hartford Promise is already a part of that marketing initiative and awareness campaign, and so this would be incremental to that piece also.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Board Member Walker, Board Member Schmerling, Board Member Brody, want to make sure that you have an opportunity to pose your questions, if any.
Yeah, this is Tyrone. So I want to look at it. I need to study it a little bit more. I think my only feedback is I'd want this to really be socialized through committee, because I think the pushback I got, because the spend the money is going to elicit some input from folks. When it gets to full committee, when it gets to the full board meeting, it's kind of a done deal. And so I want to make sure that it can get through committees and have time for people to really kick the tires and really understand at that level where their feedback actually has some value to the process. That'd be my only general feedback. I don't have a reaction to the choices thus far.
Thank you for that. Board Member Schmerl.
I don't have any questions, but I do support the concept. I think as an investment, and I look forward to hearing more of the conceptually. I think this is a good way to invest those dollars.
So Board Member Schmerling, you were cutting out there a little bit, but I'm going to try to paraphrase for folks. It sounds like you're in support conceptually of the approach, but just looking for some more details of how it actually gets operationalized.
That's correct. Good summary.
Okay. Board Member Brody. Um, Superintendent, Chief Penn, Jesse, is there any other comments that you want to make the board aware of before we adjourn?
I'll say next steps, as I mentioned, June 6th was the date that the foundation team identified to get some information back around the draft fund agreement. And so some of the questions that you all lifted here, actually, I'll share with the foundation team to perhaps inform that fund agreement. Chief Penn and I will have conversations around any financial reporting that we have to think about as it relates to, right, the board transferring the funds over. Anything else, Chief Penn, that comes up for you?
No, just one of timeliness. Since it's coming out of this year's surplus, this has to be pinned down by June 30th at the latest. And that includes cutting checks for it.
Actually, Chief Penn, that's a great point. Can you maybe speak a little bit about that? Like, what are the implications if we do not meet those deadlines, and like, what does that all mean, I guess?
Well, in order for me to pay it out of this year, the funds have to be incurred in some way. In other words, we pretty much would have to sign off on the agreement. There would have to be board consent to the amounts that we're committing to it. If that's not transpired by the end of June, I really can't create the encumbrance for it in June to pay it. And it'd be my preference to cut the checks out of it before June 30th.
And what happens to those funds if we do not?
Typically they roll
deadline.
back into the city's general fund, or we figure out some other way to utilize them. But time is of the essence since we're already at Memorial Day.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Just
Go ahead.
a further clarification. There is no mechanism to roll over excess funds into the next fiscal year.
That is correct.
Because these are general, this is from the general fund budget.
If this was from a grant, we might have more flexibility if it was a multi-year grant, but general fund money rolls over from fiscal year to fiscal, does not roll over from fiscal year to fiscal year.
Then this is Board Member Walker. Chief Penn, I guess to nail down the specifics of what you're saying, okay, does a commitment for the money have to be made by June 30th, or does the money have to physically move? Because you seem to indicate both are possible.
My preference would be that the money actually moves. The commitment would actually have to be there with a very clear cut. How much are we putting in where? In
Okay,
place before June 30th.
Then I'd want to have that be the target, that we understand that that's the, because to me, then that gives us the full month of June to have the full committee meetings, to have the full board. And then as long as we end June with the full breakdown as to here's the money, here's how it gets broken down, then we've met our commitment, correct?
I guess it would depend on how exactly that all plays out.
What do you mean?
I mean, I would need to see what actually transpires in the month of June to decide whether or not there's an actual commitment or not.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying. The goal would be for us to have commitments
Board-
where the money
board-
needs to go.
Board Member Walker, I think you're asking some really great questions, and I think that's probably something that we could flesh out in finance. I do think that there's some extra steps that need to take place between the superintendent and the Hartford Foundation. So I just want to make sure we're not prematurely making or thinking about this without having all the details. But I think you are posing some great questions that we could flesh out once we have all the details in front of us.
Okay, that's fine. We can get it done in committee.
Yep. Any other questions from the team? All right. With that being said, it sounds like next step, Superintendent, you'll meet with the foundation on June 6th. This would be socialized at the very least through school and family engagement. No, sorry, community and family engagement and the finance committee. If there's no other questions, I'll give everyone back extra time in their day. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you